Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Trans Stupid, where we take a look at the wonderful world of LGBTQIA+ news because stupidity is intersectional. So the first story that I'm going to talk about this week is one which is admittedly a little bit late, but it's one that I need to talk about because I've not really seen that many people discussing it. Now, last week, the Labour Party in the UK held their annual conference in Brighton, and to call it a shambles is a little bit of an understatement. But amongst all the far left madness that was going on, there was a particular meeting which was held by a gender critical group known as Women's Place UK. Now, I've covered them in the past when they've been targeted by angry gender radical trans activists who have been determined to have them shut down. And last week was no exception, as you'll see in this video.
Gender identity rather than gender reassignment as protected characteristic, and to remove exemptions such as access to single-sex spaces. Just to be crystal clear, the exemptions they are referring to are the ones which allow service providers to exclude male people from some facilities and services, even if those male people have changed their.
So this is the protesters who have a right to protest but not to intimidate. They're kicking on the windows to stop the meeting. The police are doing nothing at all. They're just standing there and letting people kick the window. Police are doing nothing. Well, I've just had Pardon?
Come on, don't get in conversation, don't get in conversation, come on.
Police are still doing nothing.
Let me go front, please.
Yes.
Right.
So intimidation of women is continuing. Police are doing nothing. Fight back!
Now, I support the rights of groups to protest, and when I say protest, I mean do it in a way which isn't going to disrupt and ultimately remove the platform of people who they disagree with. To trans activists, however, they seem to be able to get away with whatever they want. The police stood there and did basically nothing as angry activists banged on the windows, shouting everything which they could think of, and it did not look like a normal protest. It didn't look like they just disagreed, but it looked like intimidation. It looked like an attempt to get them to shut down if they could cause as much disruption as possible. Their thought line must have been that, well, they'll just close down the event, thus enabling them to get their way and Women's Place to know their place. Now, it doesn't surprise me that this kind of thing is happening. I covered a meeting which they held in Bristol last year where there were activists blocking the doorways, stopping people from getting in. And it's something which is a very common trend amongst these kinds of radical activists. I mean, a lot of these are very much Antifa types, and we know what Antifa can get like.
Scum off our streets! Nazi scum off our streets! Nazi scum off our streets!
But what I found particularly amazing is following this display, they actually launched a petition calling on Jeremy Corbyn to denounce Women's Place UK as a transphobic hate group, apparently endorsing transphobic hate crimes. Now, that's an incredibly serious allegation. I followed Women's Place for a while, and of the gender critical groups, they are one of the more reasonable ones. They are the ones that are a little bit more down to earth and a little bit less of the trans women or all men who are going to come in our spaces and assault us. I find that they are a group which, whilst I certainly have some disagreements with, them being a predominantly socialist group and me being me, their discussions on trans people aren't what I would consider to be particularly inflammatory. And I think that's important to highlight because they're always going to try and push the narrative that they're just trying to shut down these evil bigots that are expressing hatred, that wants to literally kill all the trans people. And that is not the case. But it's interesting that this all came about in a week where we saw a lot more of a discussion on how to talk in politics, where Boris Johnson was condemned for referring to a surrender bill. And at the same time, the left is perfectly happy shutting down other people on the left, it should be said, just for expressing views they disagree with. Modern day politics is probably the most toxic it's been in quite some time, and it doesn't look like that's going to be changing anytime soon. But if I was a casual bystander watching this kind of thing unfold, I wouldn't be on the side of the trans activists at all. I'd be on the side of the women who are in the building, just wanting to talk about these issues. It doesn't matter whether you agree with them or not. They should have the right to talk freely without intimidation. But time and time again, trans activists consistently cross that line, and they always seem to have somebody else on the side with them to back that up. Now, a lot of that is because of the intersectional identity politics war, which is very easy to say that the trans activists are now winning. They can say that they are more oppressed than women, and in the pyramid of identity politics, Z, who is most oppressed, gets the talking stick after all. But it's important for me to talk about this and condemn it as someone who spends a lot of time commenting on trans issues online. I need to be seen to be condemning this because no other trans person in the public spotlight generally seems to be doing this. Look at the likes of Munro Bergdorf or Paris Lees. They're not going to condemn it, regardless of what they might think in private. They're perfectly happy to allow this kind of thing to continue so they can continue getting the kudos from their own community. They don't want to speak out against them. And I find that absolutely pathetic. We don't seem to have any good role models who are willing to call out the absolute insanity and the real scariness that is coming out. You know, I would love to be able to get a platform where I could talk about this outside of my YouTube channel, although I acknowledge it's certainly much larger now than I ever expected. But when you have no one condemning this, I get that this week has been a major week in British politics, virtually unprecedented. But when your career is based around trans stuff and talking about trans stuff, and you're just going to let this kind of stuff fly, this is what the world sees when they talk about the trans community. This is going to cause a lot more damage to us in the long run than anything which Women's Place could be talking about. But with all that being said, time to move on to my next story, and I think it's worth checking in with a regular on Trans Stupid, who I've not covered in about a month now, despite them being the reason why my channel has jumped so much. And that is the Titanic troon themselves, Jessica Yaniv. Now, I have said that I was only going to cover Yaniv when there was something that was really newsworthy and not just their general calls for attention, which Yaniv has certainly been doubling down on in the last month. Now that the ball waxing case isn't quite the hot news it once was, we've seen an influx in various bizarre exchanges coming from this individual, whether it's dubious awards or qualifications that they're being nominated for, or if it's acting as though they are the next Greta Thunberg, or a particularly high-profile trans activist when they still haven't done anything of note, or especially the very disturbing messages which Yaniv has been continuously sending to young women around the age of 17.
Happy belated birthday to Ellie. Happy belated birthday to Ellie.
Ellie, babe, you look like so fucking hot right now. Like, I love you. I love you, baby.
Yeah, I kind of felt dirty playing that, but don't worry, I've got some quite good mind bleach, which, you know, let's just take our mind bleach before we continue. So why am I covering Yaniv this week? Well, I wanted to talk about a new case which Yaniv is bringing against someone who I've actually talked about on this channel before. And that's Bill Watcott. Now, you might remember him from a few months ago where he lost a case against another prominent Canadian trans rights activist, Morgane Auger. And Yaniv, seeing Auger's victory, has seen this as a fairly easy payday, as they've now decided to take Bill Watcott to the Human Rights Tribunal. Now, this is kind of a bit strange because Yaniv is doing it because of just simple misgendering, not a removal of service like the ball waxing case is arguing. This is just simply referring to Yaniv as a man, which is what Watcott ultimately got in trouble for about Auger. Now, Yaniv has been sending various messages to Watcott about this. In fact, there is a mediation agreement which Yaniv has wanted for Watcott to sign. Apparently, Yaniv wants Watcott to pay $35,000. Watcott says that he's broke and has no money, but will give him the gospel, which is far more valuable and it's free of charge. So it looks like if Watcott refuses to pay Yaniv $35,000, Yaniv seems to be asking for $104 million for misgendering. Now, with Canada being the way that it is at the moment, could Yaniv actually get that money? Well, who knows? Like, seriously, a couple of years ago, you'd have thought it would have been ridiculous for being sued for referring to this as male, but we live in current year. Now, in an email from Yaniv on the 20th of September, Yaniv does say that Bill Watcott is being quite disrespectful and is refusing to maintain integrity by refusing to gender Yaniv as a woman, and then starts to request costs because of Watcott's misconduct, which is something Yaniv has been doing in the ball waxing case as well. Now, because that mediation isn't going ahead, apparently the case is due to be seen in January 2020. This is going to come after the ball waxing case reaches its end. Now, is this going to be successful? As I mentioned, who knows? In fact, a lot of this might actually hang on the success of the ball waxing case. And this isn't the only case that Yaniv has going on either. In fact, Yaniv is suing a physiotherapist because a table couldn't support Jessica's weight. Now, again, as I mentioned in my Pillars of the Community video a couple of months ago, Yaniv has a habit of filing frivolous cases. And considering Yaniv's only real call to fame outside of being an international laughingstock is Trusted Nerd, a website which really doesn't seem to make any money, if at all, this seems to be Yaniv's real gamble to actually make some bank for a change. We're going to see more of these cases, and I think a lot of this does hinge on ball waxing. If the ball waxing is a failure, Yaniv might even start backing away from a lot of these and maybe even stop the trans route at all. I think one of the reasons why Yaniv is resting so heavily on being trans is because this is the most success they've ever had, ever. Up until the last year, Yaniv hasn't really had any successes, and their whole life has just been constant cries for attention in everything which they've been able to do. They want to have that power, and certainly by being the talk of the world, albeit in a bit of a negative sense, has given Yaniv some worth. But behind all the blatant calls for attention, there's still some serious things going on in the background, and things which ultimately do have an impact in Canada for trans rights and for freedom of speech. So long as Yaniv is assaulting this, along with the serious danger which many of us believe that Yaniv poses to young women, it is still worth talking about Yaniv when things like this happen. Not so much the lol cow side of Yaniv, but more the real dangerous aspects of this character. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about this week is quite a strange story, and it did become some big news in the UK last week, as a transgender man loses a court battle to be registered as father. A transgender man from Kent who gave birth with the help of fertility treatments cannot be registered as his child's father, the most senior family judge in England and Wales has ruled. In the first legal definition of a mother in English common law, Sir Andrew McFarlane, the president of the High Court's Family Division, ruled on Wednesday that the motherhood was about being pregnant and giving birth regardless of whether the person who does so was considered a man or woman in law. Freddie McConnell, 32, who has lived as a man for several years, but retained his female reproductive system and gave birth in 2018, went to court after a registrar insisted he was recorded as the baby's mother on the birth certificate, despite him holding a gender recognition certificate that made it clear the law considered him male. The ruling was quickly attacked by campaigners and lawyers as a blow to the rights of trans parents and their children, and sparked calls, including from the judge, for legislative reform. McFarlane said being a mother or a father with respect to the conception, pregnancy and birth of a child is not necessarily gender specific. McConnell also requested a judicial review. It should also be noted that McConnell is a Guardian multimedia journalist because, well, of course he is. So I've always found the idea of trans men getting pregnant and giving birth very strange. So one of the big arguments you hear in the whole true scum community, as it were, is whether a trans woman should have problems with her penis or not. And whilst I'm certainly not someone who's going to be saying, like, no, you must have the surgery, otherwise you're not trans, I would always find it strange if someone was incredibly comfortable and loved having the dick. But the penis is one thing when it comes to having a vagina, and on top of that, using it to give birth, the most female thing you can possibly think of. How are you okay with that? How does your dysphoria play along? Like, is that not a weird thing for you? Like, you're a man, right? And you're doing something which is biologically female. And I don't just mean you being a trans man, but you giving birth. Why is that something which you're doing? And I find that the law making a ruling on this, that the mother is the one who gives birth to the child, I think that's perfectly sensible, and ultimately this is what McConnell should have expected. Not everyone is going to play along with the gender identity game. And to expect to give birth to a child, then be considered that child's father when you didn't father that child, you mothered that child. How are you expecting anything else to this? Now, you can raise the child as a father, absolutely. You can take on the role of a father. You can be a father to that child, and no one can really take that away from you. But you still gave birth. So legally and biologically speaking, you are the mother, but you can socially be the father as well. That's cool. But you're asking for the law to recognise something which really is not true at all. And I've heard arguments about the child deserving to know exactly where they came from, and I can certainly see that argument here. What if the kid might think in the future, who actually is my mother? Because the only person that seems to be recorded on here is my dad. Now, it should be noted that McConnell is wanting to appeal this and considers this ruling to just be a way of upholding the traditional nuclear family and not recognising new families that have since come about. But again, I'm not sure whether McConnell has a partner. I don't know whether he's dating a woman or a man. I don't know what the full specifics of his relationship is or why he felt the need to do any of this. But I don't think that... But ultimately, you still gave birth. You did the most female thing possible. And just accept it. Accept that you did something feminine. If I had any of my sperm frozen and someone got pregnant using it, could I say I was the mother of that child? Like, biologically speaking, legally speaking. Sure, I could raise the child as a mother, but would you consider a sperm donor to be the mother? No. A sperm donor can't be a mother. The person who gives birth isn't the biological father. Just accept this. But what are your thoughts on the stories that I covered this week? Is there anything in particular I've missed out? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoy my videos, please be sure to like and subscribe. You can also support me on Patreon and Subscribestar. And I will see you all next time. And a special thanks to Dan Norman, James C. George, Liz Udesu, The Poor of Rizzo, Rose Hypnol, Tranime Girl, Casey Adolphson, The Leviathan, James UK, Evil Moif, and the rest of my supporters on Patreon and Subscribestar.